The Blip ship gimmick is primarily about the application of variable thruster direction on a small grid. This came about with the advent of the Vulture and Big Bass Mark II thruster logic. Vid is in the comments for those that didn't see it, where I applied Whiplash 141's subgrid thruster manager script to thrusters that can change vector direction. The advantage being the increase in thrust capacity to a variable direction without having to add the additional weight and power consumption of more engines. Links are in the description to both on the Spengy's Steam Workshop, and shown here are the DLCs needed on each to enjoy all the blocks, both functional and vanity. So I started with the addition of the nacelles, with mostly a single direction worth of thrusters with supplementary thrusters to neighboring directions. Then it occurred to me that since this is a lightweight small grid fighter with the intent of performing aggressive combat maneuvers, I might benefit with side-to-side movement increases as well. So a hinge movement was also added, allowing for variation of thrust direction on the X, Y, and Z axis. Outside of the main gimmick, the general requirements I had for this ship class was atmosphere and space maneuvering, application of autocannons and dual rocket launchers, and keeping the weight low as possible to maintain a familiar dogfighting standard I've been used to. My baseline comparison was past ships both I and others had made, such as the ultralight Fred at 36,000 K, the well-armed Javelin with 12 GATs and reloadable rockets, and Space Atmo versatility like Buttlescud. I went with 12 of the punchier autocannons, dual reloadable rocket launchers, standard Hydra setup with fuel enough to get into space and still enough to work with, and ended up at 84,000 K. Also check out these lovely access panels. Ooh, I do love myself a good access panel. We'll note here that these designs predate the Automatons DLC, which is why I didn't go with the smaller connector on these. If I were to do a Mark III down the road, that definitely would be used here. The primary purpose of providing variable thruster vectoring indeed works here, providing noticeable acceleration improvements while keeping the ship relatively light. While the side-to-side improvements are going to have certain situational relevance, the Blip does operate better than similarly sized craft. And yes, the weapon volley is nice and punchy. While this type of ship would normally tag along to space on something larger and then be deployed, the independent space journey from the default planet size leaves us with 33% left in the tank, plenty enough to pull whatever maneuver and then return. The weight, while not in the ultra-light category, is low enough not to be a negative. So while the nacelles aren't all that big, going with small-sized thruster groups did underwhelm considering estimated potential thrust capability. Also, the shape I went with did mean that full side-to-side configuration wasn't completely flush in order to avoid clang, making this slightly less than optimal. The next issue I noticed was while autocannons are considerably punchier, they just shoot through too much ammo for what I could carry. I believe it was shown in a vid I saw ages ago that GATs technically have a better DPS and have more efficient ammo to weight ratio, though I'm not sure where that was. While space access is there, having no ion thrusters does leave you fuel watching more than I'd like. Since ion thrusters weren't really considered earlier on, I failed to find an elegant place to slap some on. The last issue I noticed was an odd maneuvering glitch when trying to come to a stop at space. This is probably caused by these non-standard thrust vectoring, and the only way I can figure to stabilize it is to pay attention to the stardust movement and compensate. Amusingly, the first effort that pushed me to try for an improved version of the Blip was to try for a manually designed cockpit rather than the preset cockpit block. Issues installing the vent and sealing a glass hatch had me abandon the idea and settle on the default cockpit, but I had dismantled enough at this point that I decided to try moving the stationary large atmo thrusters to the nacelles and also adding in the large variant hydros. With this in place and before other structures were added, I was able to get the side-to-side placement flush. Also at this point, ion thrusters were being tucked into nooks and crannies. Not so much to replace hydros completely, but just enough to be supplementarily useful. The bit in the old series with Buttlescud running out of fuel stone's throw away from a station comes to mind with this. Import was of course correct that ion thrusters in any quantity are a good idea on space vehicles.
Because I don't have enough now to get up. I'm at 1 right now.
Stop. Don't move.
Why didn't anybody put ion thrusters on their ships? Just like atmospheric thrusters, but in space.
Proper landing gears were added at this stage, and due to how light the craft is, turned out to be a little bouncy. To stay flush with the connector, there are 2 stages of this folding out. Here again, this 2-stage bit probably wouldn't be necessary with the Automaton's smaller connector. To solve the ammo issue, I ended up swapping the cannons for GATs. In fitting these in though, I noticed an interesting opportunity. I might could fold away the guns. I won't bore you all with the construction process, but getting these to fold away while fitting the thrusters and other blocks was an insane process, but the results were worth it. I'll cover a bit more of these fold-away guns in the bind section as it's relevant there. With all the additions, I was noticing there was a lot more lag on gyro mobility with the same 4 gyros as the Mark I. I upped the amount to 13 to get the same responsiveness. Lastly, I added parachutes as they're just too small to not put on here. And all in all, surprisingly, we ended up at the same weight, 84,000 K, same as Mark I. The advantage of having larger thrusters on the nacelles was immediately felt, giving a much punchier launch on intended direction. Having built these earlier in development also allowed flush side-to-side alignment. The addition of ion thrusters was welcome as I can swap in those on the last 25% of a space ascent to save on hydrogen costs. The hydrogen savings are significant at 78% on my test, leaving for far more fuel for activities. Furthermore, having the ion thrusters provided for simple station maneuvers without fuel use. Also, while the odd direction issue in space is still there, the effect is muted thanks to the added fixed thrusters. Swapping to GATs was the correct way to go in, as while the damage output feels similar, the ammo goes much longer. And lastly, the fold-away guns is just a joy to look at. Much like the mechanics of my fold-away bridge and ramp projects, this came about by solving one maneuver at a time and is the result of tons of nudges and trial and error. Just because this is called Mark II doesn't mean it was perfect, and doesn't mean it's 100% better than Mark I, unfortunately. Among the efforts to keep the weight down, the H2O2 generator was taken out. So you're limited to cockpit and O2 bottles you take on board, and you're not independently making hydrogens, so not a long-range space fighter. You may notice I didn't mention the rocket launcher on Mark II. Well, it is there, but my design decisions reduced it to just the one, and I moved it further back on the ship, and as a result, it doesn't do well on rapid turns in flight, meaning the rockets are only viable for straight-on firing, lest you'll self-detonate. Regarding thrust power, due mostly to the repositioning of large thrusters, there is less thrust margin on multi-vector maneuvers. What this means is there is a slight altitude loss on the side-to-side configuration, requiring more attention to altitude during combat. Lastly, I noticed an increase in physics-based glitches with Mark II if the fold-out guns are in folded-out order, or if the ship connects with a mechanism with deep subgrids. In this example, I'll just connect it to my subgrid crane, and it decided to dance for me. Before wrapping up, I need to go over the controls for these, as they may not be intuitive for many of you. Alright. Testing 1, 2, 3. Alright, you have to excuse my voice. Of course I have a cold, and I also recorded the narration back in like August or something, and now it's November, because of course it is, because we've just been having fun, haven't we? But yeah, I'm going to go over the toolbox, or toolbars here, and explain what everything does, so we can figure out how to play this game, because it's been like forever. We're going to get in the Blip Mk1, so here's the Blip Mk1 here, and Blip Mk2 over there. Okay, so Blip Mk1 has 1, 2 toolbars, so not much to really remember with this one. And this one's pretty straightforward. 1 and 2 are going to do the atmosphere and hydrogen thrusters. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. 3 is going to do the switch lock for the connector. The fun with the nacelles happens with 7, 8, 9, and 4, 5, 6. So you want to start with 7, 8, 9 first, and what I do is I literally press 7, 8, 9, and that will move these. And you're going to find that there is a triplet of binds for a lot of the actions for both Mark 1 and 2. And what this is a splitsy logic of turning rotors or hinges on or off, and then locked on and off, and then actually perform the rotation. So that's what's going on. Is in this case 7 is the turning on and off, 8 is the lock on and off, and then 9 is the actual rotation. So well, after you rotate, I then recommend also then doing 7 and 8. Because if you're flying around, sometimes this will flop all over the place and become quite annoying. But then you could do 4, 5, 6, and as I mentioned, you roll 4, 5, 6, and then 4, 5. And you just press the 4, 5 or the 7, 8 at the same time, and that can keep it real simple. So the reason why I recommend doing the 7, 8, 9 first is I've had in brief times that for whatever reason, just because I guess the geometry of Blip Mk1, it would just lock if you try to do this one first, because it was not designed to have that maneuver first, and in fact, just like that, it's now locked. So, so just don't do that first, and you'll avoid a lot of problems. Okay, actually, you got it to fold out. Yeah, so don't do that. Anyways, toolbar 2. You have the machine guns on the first one, which normally you would just be able to close. And yeah, it's very punchy, very, very punchy indeed. And then the 2 is allowing for missiles to be activated. 3 is to keep the missiles firing continuously, right? 4 is a group of lights on the front. It's just kind of bright here, so you can't really see them. 5 is going to be your front camera for when you're wanting to get right up and see what you're actually aiming at. Kind of a habit I have in most of my fighting ships. 6 and 7 are the little fold-away, tucked-in dealy-dads on the bottom, or on the left and the right. Very nice. Nothing real practical. I think there is a small container right there on the right, but to store all sorts of interesting knickknacks. But otherwise, there's really no reason to really mess with these realistically, unless you're just kind of like role-playing or whatever. And 8 is the stockpile for the hydrogen tanks. So very simple. Only other thing on this is I've got the LCD scripts. No special mods necessary though to run this ship or Mark II. Future projects I will have special mods that I'm going to reference as I get those videos out. I'll point those out. But for these, they're stock as is. You just download them and away you go. Alright, Mark II. This one's quite a few more binds. So we have toolbar 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is a 5. I know 6, but there are 5 toolbars, and I'll get into that. Most of them you're not really going to have to mess with unless you really want to get funky. But starting with this one, it's very similar to Mark I. You have the atmosphere, hydrogen, and in this case ion thrusters are on this one as well, because I thought enough to actually tuck them in on this one. And the same movement pattern as the Mark I, 7, 8, 9, you roll it, and they will roll up. They're just a little bit more forceful and quicker than Mark I. And then 4, 5, 6, bam. And you can see if you don't lock them, you see how you get a lot of clang. So that's why you need to lock them after putting them into position, especially with Mark II, because it's a little bit more energetic with its movement. Alright, toolbar 2. Do not press 1, 2, and 3 on this one. I'm going to explain that one in a minute. I'm going to skip over it for now. But you have the guns for 4, which I'm not going to fire, because if you watch the rest of the video previous to this, you'll notice that they're tucked away into the ship. So I'll do that in a second. 5 is the connector. 6 is being able to zoom in and out with the camera that's in the front. Same deal. 7 is lights, which will also include lights on the bottom of the ship as well as the front. 8 is turning on and off the navigation lights. That's these lights that are right on the edges of the ship and at the top of the ship. So if you want to be extra stealthy for raisins, then that's how you turn that on and off. And 9 is firing once with the missiles, which I'm not going to do because, again, if you've watched earlier in the video, yeah, we're not doing that. Toolbar 3. Okay, so this one is the landing gears, is this first bit. So we're going to turn Atmos on so you can see this. Toolbar 3. 1, 2, and 3, that's folding up the forward and rear landing gears. See, just like so. Actually, I'm going to fold that up like that. 4, 5, and 6 is just the forward one, and it only moves it down just a little bit to keep it flush for when connecting to the connector right there, just so you aren't kind of pogoing back and forth on the front of it. That's really all that's for. Okay. Put that back like that, and roll that forward like that. Beautiful. Okay. Let's see, 7 is the parachutes. It's manual ejection of the parachutes on the left and right. 9 is the hydrogen tanks for stockpiling. 4, okay, here's where I can get into some of the magic of this. So, fold-away guns. This is only for manually working this, okay? So, the first thing you want to do is starting with 7, 8, 9. And that's to fold up the top. And again, you want to lock it after you're done. Then you move up to 4, 5, 6. Now fold down the front piece of armor, and then you do 1, 2, 3, and that will fold down the top bit of armor on the sides. After all of that is unfolded, then you can go back to toolbar 2 and press 1, 2, 3, and that will fold up the guns on both sides. If you press 1, 2, 3 first, you're going to have a massive physics glitch, which will make this dance. If you want to do that, go for it. It's actually kind of fun, but since I'm doing a demonstration here, I'm not going to do it right now. So fold this down, lock, go back to toolbar 4, 1, 2, 3, lock, 4, 5, 6, lock, 7, 8, 9, lock. Alright, and then lastly, we're going to go to toolbar 5. This is the start of when I started to learn how to automate certain things through timer blocks. And what this does is allows you to fold out the guns without having to memorize that ridiculous convoluted pattern. You just unlock the first 2, which is to turn on and unlock certain movement blocks for the sequence, and then you're pressing timer 3 to fold them out. And that just folds them out. You can then lock 1 and 2, and you're done. If you want to fold them back, it's timer 4. So it's a slightly different order for when it folds back at. You may have noticed the glitch a little bit there. Every once in a while, because of how quickly it moves, it will fold out in a weird pattern. It's not too common, but every once in a while, those little dingle bits, in fact it did right there, it kind of gets a little glitchy. It's not real common, but every once in a while it'll do that. Yeah, see, there, fine. And did I skip any? Nope, that was it. Alright, that's it. Otherwise, no other surprises with the ship. And this is what it looks like if you fold them out of sequence. Yeah, a clingy mess. so, just follow the steps and you should be good to go. Alright, cool beans. Thank you, sirs. Thank you, ma'ams. So what's the verdict for use for Blips Mk1 and Mk2? Honestly, they make for fun romps and are a great showcase of some complicated mechanics, but I don't feel they're the best for survival combat scenarios. The fact is, while they may be faster in maneuvers, their complicated mechanics and lack of heavy armor mean they're not going to take a punch, will lose functionality quicker with so many interconnected systems, and would be obnoxious to repair in survival if projectors aren't used. For survival use, simple is usually better. That being said, I do genuinely find these fun to fly, and the logic of these mechanics will likely find use in small ways in future craft. I've made both of these available in the Spengy's workshop, and I welcome you all to give them a try and poke them for improvements. Comments and suggestions are welcome, and as always, thank you all for stopping by.